All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are super blessed and excited to be in another community conversation. I'm Brandon Middleton, and we've got a special guest, Robby Greenfield, here to chop it up and chat with us about some of his career and life experiences and his journey in the blockchain and crypto and just fintech and Web3 space. So, really, really excited to pass the popcorn over to him in 1 second. But before we get started, just to level set you all, if you're rocking with us for the very first time, these community conversations that we're doing are literally to give game out to Black and Brown and underrepresented folks to just give them a sense of what they could be doing in their futures. The places that we've scraped our knees and bumped our heads a little bit, we're hoping we can offer up to you as a way for you to have a straighter line of a career journey and educational pathway than we've had. So yeah, we're just gonna have a good time here, do some Q&A. And yeah, in about 45, 50 minutes, we'll close it out. But it's gonna be lots of goodness and lots of gems in that time between now and then. So without further ado, I want to pass the microphone over to my brother Robby. Tell the people who you are, where you are, maybe a little bit about the blockchain that you got from your ear and all of that, man. Just give it to us all.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Brandon. And thanks for just having me talk with you all. So my name is Robert Greenfield, the CEO of Emerging Impact. We're a DeFi neobank specifically targeted at emerging markets, focused on smallholder farmers, but also focused on refugee communities as well. More broadly, we just work with NGOs, with fintech firms, but also individuals who are either working to give access to or who need access in incredibly remote and under-resourced communities. So you oftentimes don't have a phone, certainly don't have an iPhone, don't have internet sometimes, don't have a proper bank account, or use mobile money, and are usually a part of that 2 billion that is oftentimes referenced without much context. When you think about the underbanked, the unbanked. I'm from Atlanta. That's where I am today. But of course, EI started out in the Bay Area, so I got to give my props in Oakland. And right now our team is around 12 or 13 people, and so I've gone all the way from internship to failed startup to Web3 company to startup that's doing better now in terms of my experience.
That's awesome, man. So from the A out to the Bay Area, and then like back when you were starting your career, I don't know that fintech and blockchain and crypto were at all like in the mainstream consciousness.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
that young guy or girl who's like dreaming of studying like what you're operating in right now, just tell us a little bit of a story of how post education you got started and how you found your way even into this space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to start that whole thing off, one takeaway that I do want everyone to have, especially if they're in a place in their life where they don't know what their so-called purpose is always give bias to the things that that you're amazing at, that you'd be doing anyway. And if you don't know what that is, as you go through your experiences, keep track of the things that get closest to that definition, because that's where you're going to truly excel. And so I got in. I was lucky to get in early. In 2011. One of my friends, Kennard, who had a Bitcoin exchange startup at the time, so he was way beyond his years. I got me into Bitcoin, and then that evolved into an obsession of initially day trading, as many of us might do, with cryptocurrencies. Of course, there are a lot fewer then, and into, the engineering side, because I had an engineering background. And it was always something that I did that I didn't really think of, but I always wrote about, or played around with when I was not working. And eventually, became, when I moved to Cali after leaving Cisco Systems and going to Consensus, ended up becoming a full-time job. And then, I ended up finding a place in it more broadly in terms of my social sector work within it. And so, yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I got through it. Mentally, it was more of, how can I leverage my engineering capabilities to help people across the diaspora? Because around the time that I was graduating, Trayvon Martin, was murdered, and that kicked off a lot of hashtag activism. And not all of us have the Dr. Martin Luther King voice, right? There's certain elements of leadership, that are made to follow and lead protests, and there are others that are made to change ways in a different type of way. And so, being an engineer, I wanted to figure out where I was on that spectrum of supporting Black and brown communities.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And I think we have an American context. A lot of the listeners and the viewers probably will only understand what it means to be, Black or brown in their neighborhood or their community. But for you to have traveled and seen, like, I think this man texted me from Tanzania like a week ago. This man was in like, you've gone all over. So maybe the next question could be just like, what have you seen that kind of connects our experiences? And then what have you
Oh,
seen
yeah.
just totally different, like you could not understand unless you were to leave America and go to see like some of these other places?
That's a really good question, because again, in the African American context, you always feel, less Black per se when you go to an African country, because you lack the cultural context that was kind of taken away from you if you are a part of, if your family is a part of the slave trade. And one thing that is we definitely have in common is that racism is global, right? And so even though there may be majority communities that are Black in Tanzania or Kenya or Nigeria, their experience with the international world is very much of the same as our experience, within the context of the United States. And so there still is, even though you might not have the same head nod, there still is a shared comfort, that transcends experiences when you are with Tanzanians or Nigerians or Kenyans, and that applies in business, that applies in friendship, that applies when you're going out, right? There's a cultural undertone that makes you much more comfortable. And of course, if you're much more comfortable, you're likely to do much better, right? And that's, separate from, maybe a context in which you might be working in a majoritively white business, or going to a majority white school where you don't share those same comforts, and so are more anxious, and oftentimes are going to fail a few times. So that's a shared thing. I think the thing that's very different is that they're less obsessed with race than in African Americans, and so that changes their perception as to what to expect in certain interactions. And I mean, that again, for South Africans, that's not true. I think they are about the same. But for other places that haven't had apartheid, or been out of, have had independence for at least a few decades, they think about it less, just because they don't see it as much, or at least not as obviously. Theirs are more in colonial economic ways, and then ours are more in your face overt ways, like a white police killing, somebody who's Black. And so those are where the differences are.
Yeah, that's cool. So like the place that you find yourself in now, like trying to help bank the unbanked and give like on ramp and like a resource to folks that are like way on the extremes of the financial systems,
Yeah.
have a financial system within all of fintech and blockchain and crypto. Like that's one space.
Yeah.
And there are people who are like operating at different areas within that same umbrella. How did you come to say, I want to start a business or start emerging impact and focus on this particular space versus another kind of niche?
Yeah, and it really started when I worked at Consensus Social Impact. So Consensus, I led a team that only focused on deploying blockchain-based applications for major NGOs and UN agencies. And so out of that experience, we developed a lot of firsts, like, first blockchain-based worker voice program in Mexico with the US State Department, first blockchain-based grants management platform in Australia with World Wildlife Fund. And then one of those was first crypto-based humanitarian aid program in 2019 with Oxfam International in Vanuatu. And so we knew what was product market fit. We had the advantage of knowing what was product market fit, given that we had all these different pilot engagements that focused on seeing what succeeds and what doesn't. And that led to the development of Emerging Impact a few years later that focused on first digitizing humanitarian aid to making it 100% transparent from the NGO perspective, but then also creating wallets that actually could be used in places where internet is intermittent, or digital literacy or financial literacy is low. And then only recently, in the past year or so, we found that, okay, when you can enable someone to access digital finance more broadly in hard to reach areas, you can then start to focus on different financial contexts beyond just aid, right? So you can focus on savings, you can focus on financing. Obviously, you can focus on, on and off ramps between mobile money and digital currency, and fiat currency and mobile money, and digital currency. And so that's where we are now in terms of, okay, let's create a broader infrastructure that allows people to build blockchain-based applications in emerging markets that are socially defined, and or allow people within those communities to do things that they would never otherwise be able to do, like have a savings account or access any type of credit formally. And so that's kind of how that progression happened. But it only happened with starting with just building for communities that are going to be hard to reach first.
And I imagine, like, as a little kid, little Robby, mom, dad, like family was probably a big part of how you got the confidence, how you got the orientation to like be doing some of what you're doing today. So talk to us a little bit about how, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old Robby, his community kind of helped to pour some fuel into, what will later become, CEO Robby of this, social impact organization.
No, yeah, man. I mean, I think black parents have high expectations, right? Sometimes they beat it out of you. and I think, no, but I mean, it's a good thing because there was no, you're not going to do well, right? It was, you're going to find the thing that you're going to do well in, and you need to work incredibly hard. We all get the 2 times as hard you have to work 2 times as hard conversation. And I think that created a strong basis because, people make it seem that, the Zuckerbergs and all these, Elon Musks and all the world, like they just had a vision in their head as to what they were going to do. And that's not true. They bumped into a lot of things, failed on a lot of things, and found what they were best at. And so I think it created a great deal of like academic persistence, because engineering, I mean, I was not the greatest engineer at Michigan. I got my butt handed to me on a lot of classes. Like it was a continuous thing. And it was very hard to get to. I mean, I remember calling my mom and just being like crying, just like, I hate this major. But it was their persistence, and they instilled in that to me when I was really young as well. Like, you're going to be an engineer. That's it. Had I not done that or done things like gotten my MBA after, I don't think I would have been able to get to where I am now skill wise. Mm-hmm. But there are things that I, fought against all the time. So I think that, and that actually exposed me to opportunities like meeting Kennard to learn about Bitcoin that then impacted my life, right? But if I weren't focused on engineering, then I wouldn't have gone to Michigan for the engineering program and thus met those people. And so I think there's a lot of resonant effects, both in terms of instilling persistence and diligence into kids when they're younger, as to, make sure to work hard regardless of what you do, but then also at least, setting them into a direction to have those base skills that are going to be cross applicable across a lot of different things that they might want to get into. And so that's kind of where that came from. And, of course, being from a Black family, that I think we're particularly empathetic community in terms of how we feel pain from others, because because our community suffers from it itself. And that's where I think the social impact comes in, from our communal perspective.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear, kind of the background, and to give more context and contour to the man, the myth, and the legend here. I want to move to, like, you mentioned like humanitarian aid, and we're sitting kind of in an interesting space in time and history where lots of people are experiencing displacement and needing of aid, as this war in Eastern Europe is like playing out, which is so sad. How have you positioned your company? What have you seen and understood that's working well in terms of helping these folks who need the aid? And then just over the last number of weeks, like could we be doing better in order to better resource, better protect, and better serve?
Yeah, I mean, particularly in terms of humanitarian crises caused by geopolitical conflict, like with the war in Ukraine. Um, I think it shows two things. I mean, one, it shows it's a message to the social sector community, like NGOs and government agencies, that you cannot go about these programs the way that you have been going, which is a very, very important message. And I don't say that to be opportunistic. I say that to say that that plus climate change causing natural disasters that also create a lot of migration and refugee communities happening at the same time, increasingly, is something that emerging technologies and opportunities were built for, right? To help solve those problems or create more sustainable solutions in those scenarios. And so, that's something that I think, just a learning from it. I think the way that we're responding to it is, I mean, we do have what's called unconditional programming plan for Ukrainian refugees in Poland, with a few partners. And so I think it's one thing to say that a technology deserves to have an opportunity, and there's another way to prove it. And so to the second part of the question, like what should people be doing, is don't just stop at like cryptocurrency donations. Um, the opportunities like this, and I say that obviously only for the people who aren't suffering from this directly, right? Because their main focus is survival.
Yeah.
But for everyone else, it's an opportunity to understand what happens in these conflicts in real time, and to understand, okay, what are the solutions that don't exist that align with what I think I can do best that could help make this situation better for the people who are experiencing it. Right. And that can be a lot of different things. Like if you're a comedian, it could be getting comedy to refugees in a time where they really need it. Right. If you're an engineer, that could be building application designer, that could be creating, collateral for them to understand where to go when they go into Poland at the border. Right. There's a lot of different ways that you can provide a lot of different values. And so, just being educated as to what's happening and how it's happening. And if you get the chance, go to these places. I mean, go to the border of Poland to volunteer and just interact with people directly. I mean, obviously, I know that's not the vast majority of people, but for people who can do that and don't know how to help, I think that would be a great way to help. And you can learn a lot on the way, because unfortunately, that is not, it's the sole instance on the planet of a geopolitical conflict creating refugees. It's all over the world. And so it'll make you more useful in those situations as well.
Yeah, great insights. And yeah, you might not know the exact right thing to do, but I think to your point, like doing something is definitely better than doing nothing and being a spectator at a time like this. So yeah, you mentioned education a little bit, and part of like why we're putting community conversations on is to try to kind of break out of the higher ed ivory tower and democratize some of the stories and some of the knowledge for the folks that watch and listen to these. How would you say like education in this particular space of fintech and crypto and blockchain has transformed your own life, transformed kind of the lives of folks that you've taught? You mentioned you started in 2011, and I don't remember what the price of Bitcoin was back then, but like
Hello.
it was low compared to where it is right now. So I would imagine that some people whose lives were literally changed because they were educated about this stuff early.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and I have a bias, but I think that everyone should become blockchain literate, like because at all sides, right? There's a community management and marketing side that's different. There's a engineering side that's different. There's a design side that's different. There's a socioeconomic side that's different, from a research perspective. So I really do think that it is an industry that provides opportunities for all. And I would say that, I've had multiple friends that have become multimillionaires, and not just because they held cryptocurrency, luckily, right? And in fact, the opposite of that. I have friends, Black people, like brothers that like One became a millionaire by understanding how to create models for technical analysis across cryptocurrencies and doing margin trading, which, for a long time, people didn't think that technical analyses that is used in stock trading really mapped to cryptocurrencies as well. And they didn't know where the correlations were, and they're just getting a handle on that. But he learned this. I mean, he learned. I told him about it in 2012. So he's been doing this for 7 years, and he's has clients to do that. The other one was a venture capital leader who, light-skinned brother, wasn't given a chance, in terms of funding for his, for his fund. So it's very, very difficult. I mean, it's difficult for startups, Black-led startups, to get capital. It's even more difficult for fund managers who are Black to get capital. But he was incredibly smart in terms of how protocols worked, and he did a lot of research, and he just bought a house in full for his father. And it's affected my life pretty greatly too. I mean, where I am right now, I bought with crypto. I bought, first car in crypto. Like, I paid off my graduate student loans in crypto. And that was more on the research side. So I definitely think just understanding about it, and you don't have to go deep, right? Just reading the white papers, reading the news, your brain will auto associate patterns as to where you find interest, right? So if you're a designer, using a lot of different dApps, for no particular purpose, is going to allow you to probably be a better designer in terms of what mainstream audience people expect. Same thing for engineer, for other things. But yeah, that's how it's changed my life. And that's kind of my advice to people is read, because most people don't read. I would say 90% of the people in the room don't read. And so that kind of gives you an advantage as to what you could use the technology for in your own career and how that could benefit you, personally.
Yeah. And I'd say I tend to agree with you. Like, in my day job, like, I carve out time to actually sit down and read and to reflect and ponder on things, where I think the social media and the busyness and just like capitalism makes us move so quickly that we don't, make allotments of time for those very important things. So if you're listening to this or you're watching this, don't, feel bad about carving out a block of time that you would need in order to learn something new, or to, just absorb something that didn't take the first time or the second time. I watched a documentary about how Bill Gates, like, once out of every quarter, he'll take a think week, and he'll go to like a cabin, or he'll go somewhere that's remote and just take a stack of books and just jam, figure something out, or to like think new thoughts. So I'm like, if Bill Gates needs to block out time, the boy is gonna do that as well.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, because that's the thing is that, like, and it sounds nerdy, but like reading it literally is like upgrading your mind, just like you upgrade a MacBook or a Windows. Like, it's just giving it a whole bunch of new features in terms of models that you can reuse. Because very few often do I ever think of something new. I think of something new in the context that it is a whole bunch of other things that I've already learned that are applied a different way. And even doing that, I still find competitors in the same space. So, I think it's incredibly important. Yeah.
Cool. Well, it's about like the halfway point, and I wanted to like do a little bit of a halftime, like, quick fire type of round.
Yeah.
We'll jump into some of the other questions. So just like, outside of kind of blockchain and crypto, Robby, I'd love to have folks in the audience and the listeners just understand a couple of things. So maybe we'll touch on travel and food and sports and like hobbies and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
let's start it off on the travel tip, since you've definitely been to more countries and places than I've been.
It might not be true.
I think I could safely say that you have. Let's call out your three maybe favorite places that you've been, and then maybe three more that are on like the bucket list that you're still like trying to get to.
Try to get to. So three favorite places, definitely Japan. So Tokyo. Tokyo is one of the dopest places I've ever been to. I mean, it's just Japan in general, just like they have everything. And people are just so respectful, and just everything is efficient, and it's great. Also a lot of fashion stuff over there. Tanzania, which my first time was just a week ago. Beautiful beaches, very, very, very diverse community. So it's Africans, it's people from Middle Eastern countries, it's Indians. Also very kind, very soft spoken. And they've really just really beautiful country. And then the third, I'd say, it's either the Philippines or Mexico, honestly. The Philippines, I mean, they have the best beaches in the world. They have amazing mangoes. Mango's my favorite fruit. Mexico, my partner is Mexican, and so I have a bias there, but also, I've learned Spanish, over there. So, it's more of a cultural thing. That's my top three on that side. And in terms of ones that I still want to go to, I haven't been to Nigeria. I would love to go to Nigeria, and I'll put Ghana as well in no particular order because I know the two are kind of rivals. And then Malaysia would be my third one.
I don't know if the audience caught this, but you're a smart man. When you say in no particular order, I have literally Nigerians in Ghana fighting about jollof rice, about like, so y'all didn't get that. Robby just did something very important there.
No, man, no, I'm neutral. Both of y'all are great. Both of y'all are great.
Yes. Got to play Switzerland sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So let's go over to like, I don't know, like hobbies. So outside of kind of what you do for work, where can we find you? What kind of things you enjoy doing? Talk a little bit about reading. I don't know if it's sports or if it's something else, but just give people a sense of what Robby loves.
Yeah. So definitely reading. I mean, obviously part of that is white papers. I love just seeing like the different protocols that come out and the different patterns that they use in terms of game theory and economics. Because they're creating their own economies. Like that's what protocols are, and people don't understand how important that is. But there's so many new things that you can do with finance by understanding those protocols that could never be done before. You could have cashless donations, you can have self-paying loans, things that sound magical, but they're not. There's math behind it. And then more generally reading about macro trends, because I tend to, as an engineer, I tend to focus too granular, and that helps me kind of just understand why am I doing the things that I'm doing in the context of a greater plan. And then outside of soccer, I'm talking trash and playing soccer. That's a pastime. That's a Robby pastime. Because I played soccer in college, and it was like an everyday juggle thousands of times a day thing. Like, I can honestly say if anything about me that was the closest to Kobe mentality, it was the way that I trained for soccer, in terms of how serious it was.
I never knew that about you. I also played soccer, and the end of my eliteness, I tore my ACL the day after I graduated high school, but some of the buddies went to the MLS and played over in Europe and all that stuff. So what position did you play?
I was right mid. So right and left mid. I switched a few times, and then occasionally get up to striker. So I was on the attack, man. I was. What about you?
I was a sweeper, so I was on the defense.
Oh, okay, all right.
And that was my jam for most of my high school career. And then when I played club soccer, I was in the midfield mostly. So if I was club, I'm more likely to score some goals. But like in high school games and when I was playing for school, never. I was always on the defensive side.
Man, I don't know. I actually wish that I started on the outside back. Like looking at being older, knowing myself more now and where my actual capabilities are. I really do think that in the back, because it's a whole different thing. You can control the game in a whole different way. And I didn't only recently realize that until I played it in a scrimmage. I had never even saw that part of the field before.
Like, what is this?
Yeah. You're like, what is, I got the ball in front of me? What is going on here? Be a lot more rougher too, which that's an exciting, being playing in the back is exciting. It's exciting.
Yeah, this is cool. And like, we would have never known this about each other, but like breaking into spaces that are not like quote unquote traditionally Black. I grew up playing soccer in the 90s where there weren't that many people in America that were like prioritizing soccer over like basketball or football. And then to be Black in the sport as well was also interesting to look at, but I loved it. So I didn't have any problem like putting work into it. And I think even kind of with blockchain and some of this emerging technology, won't expect to see us in every single room or every single space, but just for folks who are watching and viewing, like if you like it, go after it. Like don't let anybody tell you that you can't do it. Don't let anybody try to cast doubt or throw any shadows or shade into it. If you like it, you like it, go for it. You can make a living for yourself, as Robby and I can attest. Like whatever route you take is probably the right one. So just find some cheerleaders and support, and don't be afraid of scraping that knee, bumping that head a little bit. But we're gonna try to, see the community and let y'all know what we did so that you don't make the same mistake twice, I think.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And I would say, deflect the negative energy. And it's hard to do. And to your point, you'll have failures where you might be, disappointed in yourself or just disappointed around the support, the lack of support that you have. But if you keep going, you will find that positive energy that will make what you're doing, feel even better, than you already feel doing it. And then that's sometimes hard. Sometimes requires you to go seeking out the communities that are like you to help protect that energy so that you can, focus on what you need to do. But when you're younger, it can be a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. So let's say the last lightning round question I'll ask is to go back to the blockchain earring and like the fashion sense. What kind of I'm a sneakerhead, so I could go from the feet up, but like tell me, you mentioned Japan a little bit too. Like tell me about the fashion sensibilities and like what you're looking at when you're dressing yourself and kind of putting on to feel and to look your best.
Yeah, man. So I guess fortunately and unfortunately, I'm definitely a hype beast. I'm definitely a hype beast. And that just comes from when we're kids, you see Pharrell, you see 50 Cent, or you see Diddy with Sean John and all those things. Coming from Atlanta, like that's everything, right? That's what Lennox was. That's what Lennox Mall. When people hear like, oh, I'm a Lennox Mall in a hip hop song, like Lennox Mall was a fashion show. Like that's what it was. And all the celebrities, Black celebrities, across Atlanta went there. And obviously these are some of the biggest and brightest stars and leaders within the town that I grew up, right? And so it left a deep imprint. So when I'm walking out of the house, I mean, I've recently been on a black tear where I'm incredibly minimalistic, but that's the engineer in me, because I don't believe in excess, but I do believe in quality. And so I have very, very few clothes. I actually only have like 3 pairs of pants, maybe 5 drawers, like 7 shirts. Like that's it. I could put all of everything that I materially own outside of like the space itself into a single piece of luggage. But for the things that I do get, I tend to get BAPE, like bathing ape. I tend to, I'll get Louis Vuitton. I'm not gonna lie. And I sometimes have very big qualms with the way that I pick these things out, since I have so few things that I get these type of things because I work in the social sector. But I always say that, as long as I'm doing more social work than I am getting these things, then hopefully the karma will balance out. Yeah. But yeah, man, that's how, and it'll always be in black, black all the way up from the ground up. And so it's random, it's weird, but that's kind of where I'm at right now. But definitely a hype beast.
No, that's awesome, man. So we'll kill the halftime show there, and then I'll ask you some questions just about futurism. So like the stuff that you're excited for, like as you look out 3, 5 decade out, like what are some of the things that you're hoping your work comes to, you're hoping like our community progresses towards. Yeah, just talk a little to us about what you're hoping for in the future in terms, it could be the kind of social side of it, it could be the
Yeah.
tech side of it, it could be the community side. Just give us some thoughts there.
Yeah. My biggest hope for at least our future is emerging impacts. My future as a part of that team is to start creating pragmatic protocols. Like a lot of the stuff that we've been building is all infrastructure based. Like, so how do you go, from mobile money, and like how do you go from M-Pesa to digital currency and back, or different fiat currencies that allow things to happen. When you allow that infrastructure to exist, the greater vision should be what can you do with it.
Mhm.
And based on a lot of our research, particularly in agrarian communities, you can take a lot of the benefits that decentralized finance, has kind of provided people with, just extra income to kind of waste in some cases. You can make them into extremely powerful economic vehicles for income equality, or just general financial security. And we're getting to a point where we're starting to understand what those models are by reading the protocols of communities that are typically majority white and very, very rich, and then applying those same models to people who are considered some of the most impoverished members of society in the world. And the reason that I look for this is because I think that the adoption of low touch products that can operate in rural environments, once you kind of crack that nut, I mean, you're talking about like onboarding like millions of people at a time and increasing incomes by billions of dollars, which has resonant effects at the national GDP level as well. For a lot of these communities like Tanzania, like the vast majority of their economy is outputs. Like they are a farming community. And I think that the reason why that excites me is because I think that, particularly Black people, we always talk about, when is it our turn, right? How are we going to flip the script? And, I think we're doing that in strides, and we've always been doing that, but maybe what's lacking in terms of how we see it is it happening on a broader scale more quickly.
Yeah.
And I think that could be one of those accelerants. And that is very exciting because, a decade or so of that, you can see a whole new social class of innovators and entrepreneurs that are now, since they're not focused on survival, they can apply their genius to something else. And then I think, the world is in trouble, right? Because like going to some of these places, you'll have people like literally living in like trash, like I cannot describe it any other way. They're living in trash and like where the trash is dumped. But when you talk to them and you understand them, you're like, this brother's smart as hell. Like I mean, this is a crime that this person is put in this situation. And it's more times often than not. Like, and so you just need to create that opportunity for those people to shine. And I'm really looking forward to that. Far smarter than me by a lot. So
I think Warren Buffett, he called it something like the ovarian lottery. Like, I mean,
yeah.
how lucky are we that we were born to who we were born to in the country we were born in at this particular point in history. So not that anybody that you come across is less worthy or worked any harder or less hard than you, but just like, this is how it goes. And like, we need to develop that empathy and kind of that outward looking view to want to travel to other places and to like scope out kind of the situation in other parts of the diaspora and other parts of the world, just to be better designers, be better engineers, to like put this stuff together without just our particular context in mind. So I appreciate the call out. And I guess I have a follow-up question to that, which would be like, there's a power in like first movers advantage, right? Where if you knew about Bitcoin in 2011, obviously you'd be better off today if you were to like had invested in it.
Mm.
Like for the future that you talk about, how much of it is like self actualized and self determined versus like
Oh yeah.
government or like a bigger entity having to like create a carve out or cede a little bit of power and resource in order to make something like that possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I definitely think that so in terms of like progress separated in external movements and how they enable you, and then internal ones, like self-actualization is definitely a thing. You know, I know that for some people that could seem kind of as like a marketing scheme that, you know, people just, you know, put on YouTube or something like that. But, you know, I think that the reason why it seems that way is because they don't explain that process. And that process is very directive, right? And I always tell people, especially like mentees, you must write down your goals and you must write down your passions. Otherwise, you don't know them. And people will argue with me. They're like, no, I know them as this and it's this. But after about two or three things, you know, it becomes more of a, I think it's this, or I may be that. And so if you don't understand what you like as a person and what feeds your energy and your drive outside of getting paid, it has to be separate from that, at least initially. You're never going to find the job or the position that you're going to do that both meets your financial goals and meets your mental goals, your psychological goals. Um, and so that if you I always tell people you got to get that figured out. Yeah, and it changes. At one point I wanted to become a data scientist, right? But I realized that although I admire and revere the work that data scientists do, that's not where I'm best put. And so especially in college, like people should be thinking about that a lot, and not necessarily only be looking for external internships to work for others, but also working on their own personal projects that align with those goals. Because you can't wait for a job. You can't wait to get a job that's going to fulfill the things that you want to fulfill in life, right? That's giving external power 100% to somebody else. But what you can do is you can find a job that you can tolerate and do your own self projects. And as those projects iterate, they actually might replace your job. And so, or you can find more alignment in the job that you do, and then, you know, find a formal job that is what you seek. In terms of, you know, and that's true both in the individual context, but also the emerging market impact context in terms of market entry. And then on the other side, in terms of incumbents making shifts to create opportunities, I do think this is true. It's never great to go into a saturated market. But what I will say is that minute differences make all the difference. Like small differences make all the difference. So there are a lot of like niche communities, you know, that aren't, you know, more than 1 million people or 400,000 people. And people look at that from a creator and entrepreneurial perspective and they say, oh, that's too small. And that's like Silicon Valley talking, right? Because if you know, were to turn that 400,000 people into subscribers at $10 a month, right, you're doing pretty well. So, you know, that's you know, $4 million a month. I mean, I think it's important to note that you shouldn't be scared of competing. You shouldn't be scared that the incumbents exist if you know what that niche difference is. If you don't, then you do need to protect yourself and you know, kind of stress your innovation in other markets that might not be as busy until you are more confident in what you offer. And again, that's both in a startup context and also in individual context, because in individual context, you're talking about the broader job market and where your skills place within it. Even if you're a freelancer and you're doing your own work, it's like is your skill different from the skills that are like it within the same category. And so, yeah, I mean, that's what I would say. But if you constantly think about these things and you connect them to what your goals are specifically, you're going to figure it out eventually. And it's not going to be an easy process, and it's not going to, you know, it's just not going to just come to you. But you will get the job done, which is, you know, the point.
Yeah, I think it would take as much like external exploration, like talking to people about it, like trying those things out and understanding for yourself that, oh, I'm not as good at this, or it's not as enjoyable as I thought when I drew this play up.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna just leave this here, X that off the, potential future thing to do list and move on to the next thing. It's gonna be as much external as it is kind of internally sitting with yourself and understanding what those goals are, what those passions are, what actually excites you and you enjoy doing. And the things that you don't enjoy doing, I say delegate them away. There's somebody
Yeah, yeah.
right there in your community that might love to do that thing that you don't love to do so much. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um I've got the words of my mother in my ear right now, and I know she's going to ask me about a bunch of the things that we glossed over. I know
Mm.
she asked me what a DAP is, what
Yeah.
Flare is, what like a bunch of these things are. So Robbie, what would you say to my mom who's going to watch this and say, these are places to get started, or these are some
Yeah.
things that I use as resources or podcasts or like just places to read. So just give the people some of that for the folks who might just be looking to get their feet wet in this space.
Yeah. I mean, I think from a news perspective, and some people might not like this, but I do think CoinDesk is helpful with creating stories as to what's happening around the world with the technology. And so that would give, anyone, regardless if you're an engineer or not, just context what's going on, right? Because oftentimes that's what people are most obsessed about within the ecosystem itself. That's correlative. I would say if they wanted to learn more about it, um, very intensely, like Mercari, which is a research agency. If you just type Mercari Research, and they actually create reports at a macro level, on a micro level, across ecosystems, across the blockchain community, on every aspect. And they're incredibly helpful. And that's a great resource. I think they have a subscription. It's like $20 a month, so it's relatively accessible. But if you didn't want to pay, you can also go to Medium. I still think that Medium is it's not as much as it was before, but I still think that in a lot of ways, Medium and just blogs more generally is still the New York Times of the crypto world, right? That's like Vitalik's blog, a lot of the venture capital firms that, I've considered have made good investments also put a lot of their research in the form of blogs, which is kind of weird because, in other financial sectors, that's not the case at all, right? It's all institutionalized knowledge in the form of newspapers. That those would be the three places that I would look. Even from a high level, I will give a shout out. Coinbase has some really good tutorials. I usually don't like giving exchange specific recommendations, but they do have they simplify a lot in terms of what are the basics about blockchain, cryptocurrency, and all these other things as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good way for folks who are just getting into the space to get started, to go to a couple of websites and start to read. If you were to have questions and want to like track and follow what you're doing, Robbie, just give them a couple of social media websites or like places that they can follow your work and your team's work at.
Yeah, absolutely. So for emerging impacts, all the social sector, humanitarian aid things that we do with blockchain technology, that's emergingimpact.com. You can also go to umojamoney.com. That's UMOJA, umoja.com, or umoja.money rather. And then personally, just Twitter is at ROBTG4, so RobTG4. I'll try not to spam y'all's networks, but that's where all our stuff is at.
That's awesome, man. Well, one, I guess on behalf of the community, I know we just have a couple of minutes left, but I just want to say thank you, brother, for investing time and giving some stories and giving some smiles to the folks that are listening and gonna watch this. And then leave you with like a last word. If you wanted folks to just take one or two things away from our conversation today, something that you would tell them to keep them inspired, to keep them going, to keep them dreaming, and to keep them learning.
Yeah, I mean, one, you're enough, and just be intentional, right? You everything that makes you great, you already have. And just be open to be coachable, learn more, read a lot, and be intentional, and that you have your goals and, what you're passionate about written down. And if you do those things, it won't be instant success. Nothing is instantaneous. Success is not instantaneous. And you have to continue earning it. So it's not, long lasting either. But if you do those simple things, you will, find your own success, how you define it, rather than how might someone else, else defines it. And I think that you'll be on your way. So.
Excellent, excellent. Well, it's been a pleasure getting to hang out for an hour, and I'm gonna have to text you offline about the next Japan trip. Maybe we go to Tokyo or Kyoto or somewhere.
Oh man, hey man, as long as they let people in, man, I'll tell you what. Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
All right. Well, have a great rest of the week, and to the community that's out there, be safe, drink water, mind your business, do all that stuff, and we'll see y'all really, really soon.
Cool, brother.
All right.